A big thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this week's video. If you need a website or a domain, go to squarespace.com/James for 10% off your first purchase.
Hello everybody, and welcome back to beautiful Denmark. I say welcome back, it sort of depends if you watched the last video or not, but hopefully you did. I'm here with Mass, and for reasons not entirely clear to me again, we're going to start this video at the end. Now, if you've watched this channel for a while, you'll know that for the last, 6 months or so, I haven't really shut up about the fact that I like to shoot between sort of 35mm and 50mm. And I do shoot either side of that, but not very often. Well, that's the case in my head. But I thought it'd be interesting to spend a couple of days somewhere beautiful like this, coastal scenery, and I wanted to track how often I had the inclination to shoot either wider than 35 or longer than 50mm while we sort of toured around the beautiful scenery of Denmark. So that's what's happening. Well, that's what has happened. We started yesterday on a bridge outside of Copenhagen. A bridge I can't remember the name of, which is a theme of this video. We'll start there. I'm just squatting for what is potentially a thumbnail, maybe. And this isn't the sort of lens that would make sense for this video, i.e. a 35 to 50. I don't think one of those exists. If there was one that existed that was like f2, sharp, edge to edge, or all apertures, then that might be my perfect lens. But I suppose in this video we'll find out. Right, shot number one is, I think, a great success. I don't want to speak too soon, but basically this bridge is going to perfectly frame this ship that's coming along and heading inland, I think. I'll have to check that. But I'm hoping to get the ship just between these two stanchions. I don't know what you'd call those. What keeps a bridge up? Concrete pillars? I don't know. Hang on, I'll just stop talking a minute while I get the shot. It'd be embarrassing if I missed it, wouldn't it? Okay, something like that, I think. 50mm works quite well for a good amount of bridge in the frame without any kind of distortion or anything. So yeah, great success in the first instance. I think this might work quite well too, actually. Ship in the distance, 50mm, lovely. Yeah, that works. Starting to wonder why I came in January. It's absolutely freezing, but perfect for my upcoming book project. I say upcoming, it's probably going to be a year before I finish it, but basically it's going to be called Human Nature. It's not really about sort of human impact on nature or anything like that, more sort of human interaction with nature, such as massive bridges. For the 800th time on this channel, sorry about the sound. I'm hoping I've mitigated the problem by buying these DJI mics, which can record by themselves as well as to the camera, which in short should mean less sound problems. But this isn't a YouTube channel about microphones, it's about photography, so let's shut up about that. Just like I say, I do apologise for the crackling. Quite annoying. On a lighter, less annoying note, people keep commenting about how the toggles on my coat look like fried eggs, so that's quite fun. Next location. So as you can probably tell, we're now on a ferry heading to, where are we going to? Ærø. And there's lots of huts there, which is partly why we're going, I think. Is that why we're going, the huts? Basically, yeah. So I'm very excited for that. But hopefully, there are also things to shoot while we're on this ferry. Patiently waiting for a boat to enter that gap. 35mm. Well, this place is quite cool, isn't it? The only slight issue I foresee, and this is nitpicking really, is that if I'm going to shoot 35mm to 50mm, I'm going to have to get quite close to block out the huts either side of the hut that I'm photographing, because they're quite tightly packed in, and that means that the huts themselves will take up quite a lot of the frame, and that means that I won't get much kind of context of the surrounding area, i.e. the water behind and the road and the grass in front. So they will just be photos of huts rather than kind of photos about huts and their surroundings. The way to get around that would be to photograph groups of huts. So that's probably what I'll do. There are birds. Too late. Right, so what I like about this one is, well, fairly obvious really. The middle hut is very, very photogenic. Naturally, they all are, but the middle hut I really like, and it's got a blue door, and it's facing a blue hut. And then off to the left-hand side, there's a red hut, and the rest of the middle hut is red. There's something quite nice about that, even if you don't include the entirety of the other huts, just including a bit of them kind of speaks to the relationship between them, I think. That sounds very arty-farty, I'm sorry about that, but it did catch my eye. I think that actually might be my favourite, just surrounded by green. Red and green always work. Well, for the purposes of sequencing, it's the next morning, and we've come to a very similar looking place, except for the fact that the huts are kind of not all in complete alignment here, which I think is much better. They're all on a slightly different plane, which should, in theory, help us to add some depth to the photos. I talk a good game, we'll see how we go. So far so good on the 35 to 50 front. I don't think there was a single time yesterday where I kind of reached for any focal length outside of that really. Not to say that I couldn't have taken photos outside of that focal range. Obviously at the bridge you can get loads of compression by going with a super long focal length, but I didn't feel the draw to do that. So my theory is kind of working out well. Well, this is quite nice at like 50mm. I'll just zoom out so you can actually see what I'm talking about. But basically there's a life hoop. What are they called? Anyway, there's one of those right there, and then you just get the huts in the background. I think that looks quite nice. Possibly one of those ones that you think on location looks great, and then you get back to edit the photo and you go, I don't really know what I saw there. But right here, right now, I like it. Oh God. Oh. Well, we've got off the ferry, obviously, and driven 3 hours to another place that I can't pronounce. A lighthouse, basically. Many of you, if you follow Mass, will have seen his photos from here, and I'm very excited to try and get something for myself. We're going to come here again at sunrise tomorrow, so this is more just a scout, I think. We've got about 45 minutes maybe until sunset. So yes, let's see what treasures lie around here between 35 and 50. I should say actually, before this video is done, that not all photographers care anything like as much as I do about specific focal lengths. Mass, for example, who is experimenting just there, I don't think he cares at all So you really don't care about focal length and stuff. You don't really think about it, do you?
No, I generally don't think about it. Like, I really try to just use the focal length that works for me, that gives me the size of my subject that I want to have in the frame. Like, I completely understand why you go often for the 40 to 50 millimeter, and I kind of like those photos too. But for the most part, like, I'm just letting the focal length be whatever it is for me to compose the photo.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I wish I was more like that.
But the thing is, like, if you do go for it and you have figured out that that's what you like to do, then by all means, obviously, like, you want to produce as many photos that you yourself likes, like if we shoot for ourselves.
Yeah.
So it is a look that I like, because when you get that natural look, that natural focal length, you don't rely on the wide angle to make like an epic foreground and really flies into your face. And you don't rely on like the very long lenses to create that like compression effect. What you do get is the natural look as how you would probably see it with your own eyes if you were there, as close to as we can get. And then you basically depend on the conditions. You depend on the good conditions, which we generally tend to value as landscape photographers, right?
Yeah.
Street photographers, so forth.
Yeah. Well, that should do it, I think. I've got about 57 versions of basically the same shot, and I think I've got a handle on how tomorrow morning's going to look, so it's been useful. Anyway, tomorrow morning I'll start the next video, but for the time being, let's now head back to my office, where I'm excited to see what the numbers are in terms of the focal lengths that I've shot for the shots that I like.
You would be forgiven for thinking that that's absolutely mad. Me feeling excited to see something that involves focal length. It's quite a boring thing. However, I did find it interesting. Firstly, because most of the shots that I like were shot at or around 35mm, when I assumed it was more likely to be 50. Secondly, I only used my favourite focal length, or what I thought was my favourite focal length, 40mm, a handful of times. And I only used it a handful of times right at the end of the video because I thought to myself, I don't think I've shot at 40mm all that much. So I sort of forced myself to. And the reality is that the difference between 35, 40 and 50, it's not massive. You could probably make an argument to suggest that you could get every photo that I got at one of those focal lengths in some way. However, it was interesting to see that I reckon 95% of the photos that I got that I liked on that trip could have been shot convincingly at 35mm or 50, when I've always been convinced that if I was to shoot with a 35mm and a 50, I would miss 40mm. And actually, on the basis of this trip at least, that's not the case. Also, one of these days I will stop talking about these focal lengths. I'm aware, as I've said, that I've spoken about them just a ridiculous amount recently. But it's something that occupies quite a lot of my mind, because I'm looking for like a 1 prime setup. And I'm getting to the point where I think that's not possible. It's going to have to be a 2 prime setup. And on the basis of this, maybe those 2 primes wouldn't involve what I thought was my favourite focal length, which was 40mm. I don't know. No conclusions. I'm concerned that you're getting incredibly bored. So I will let you go. However, first, a big thank you to the sponsor of this week's video, Squarespace. Now, I have done what I did a couple of times last year, which is to make a page of all my favourite photos from the last couple of videos in Denmark. So this video and the video before in Copenhagen. And it was super simple to do. It's all drag and drop, and so you can be really precise with where you put which images, and you don't need to worry about things like resizing or the pictures looking as you want them to on different devices, because Squarespace takes care of all of that regardless of which of the many, many templates you choose from. And I don't know how to code or use the back end of websites, and yet with Squarespace I can do it comfortably. And so if you're looking for somewhere to showcase your work online, then I would highly recommend checking out Squarespace. You can do so for free by going to squarespace.com to start your free trial. And after that, if you would like to make a purchase, then you can get 10% off of that first purchase by going to squarespace.com/James. So yeah, a big thank you to them, and you can check out the page that I was just talking about in a link in my description. Oh, also actually, before you go, the workshop that I mentioned a couple of weeks back with Mass and Nigel to the Arctic in July 2024, so next year, there is still some places available. So if you don't know, we're going to Svalbard, that's where we start. We sail around Svalbard for a few days, then sail across to East Greenland, one of my favourite destinations in the world, and explore the settlements and the fjords there. And then to disembark, we sail to Iceland for the end of the trip. So it's going to be incredible. If you're interested, as I say, there are still some spaces left, but do inquire soon because they're going quite fast. So yes, hopefully see some of you there. I'll see all of you hopefully next week for another, well, it's a bit of a video in Denmark, but I'll explain then. See you then.